Hello and welcome to How to Love Successfully. This is a podcast for female leaders who are looking for that loving connection and making their love life as much of a success as their careers have been. Here we talk about dating successfully and creating a loving relationship. I am your host, Dr. Amira Kovanen. I'm a registered psychologist and a conscious dating coach. For the past 15 years, I have been working with individuals and couples and help them with their relationships. I share from my personal experiences of dating. I share my observations from working with clients about what makes relationships successful and how to find the right person for you. I would love to invite you to follow this podcast to get notified of the new episodes and join my email list. You will find the link in the show notes to get dating tips and notifications of any new materials. But now let's go into this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Love Successfully with me, Dr. Amira Kovanen, and my wonderful guest today. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest today. My guest is Amira Mansour, aka the communication expert. And she works with companies and individuals to help them communicate with themselves. This in turn enables them to get the best out of their relationships. She's a believer that communication is the essence of understanding who you are and creating relationships where you feel heard and understood, makes you feel happier on a deeper internal level. Communicating is something we are all doing all the time, whether we realize it or not. However, it's not always something we've learned how to do well. That is so true. Through a combination of 12 years in the corporate world, working with a diverse range of people and her own experiences, she'll help you learn to understand the power of internal dialogue, how this impacts your work, friendships, relationships, and support you to get the promotion you want, the career you are dreaming of, be the business leader you desire, the partner you visualized, to live life on your terms, honoring who you were always meant to be. Whether it's through her monthly masterclasses, podcasts, or one-to-one coaching program, Amira will help you understand your values, your motivations, and your shadow self to not only be able to stop overthinking but to say what you mean and communicate as your authentic self. She'll guide you to be able to resolve the conflict in your life, assert your boundaries, and master the hard conversation so you get out of the negative spiral of self-talk and communicate with confidence and ease in every area of your life. Oh my goodness, what an amazing bio you have, Amira. So welcome today, Amira.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I am so looking forward to this. Oh my goodness, there's so much stuff that we can cover and talk about. And let's talk a little bit about what got you really interested in this area of communication?
I think it's probably like a question I get asked a lot. And I think someone recently said to me on a podcast, they were like, oh, you make communication like cool. And I was like, okay, thanks. I appreciate it. I was like, it wasn't my goal. And I think that like when you look at communication in terms of what's out there, skills, it's really corporate and it feels pretty boring. And I guess through like a huge lens in terms of like, why do I do what I do? I am so passionate about it. I always talk about it. And my partner recently made a joke because I've got communication running through my veins. That's how much I listen to you. I was like, okay, point made. But I think that it's been a combination of things over the years. And I think I got to a few kind of crossroads in my life where I got really stuck and I had to work backwards and understand like, why am I in this position? What were the lessons that I wish I'd learned a lot sooner? Because actually, as much as I'm a believer of everything happens for a reason, at the time I was like, this could have been avoided if I'd learned X, Y, Z. And that's how I piece together my method and how I work with my one-to-one clients. So part of it's always my upbringing, and I grew up as a mixed person with 2 cultures in my house, 2 different religions. I grew up in East London. And so I think there was always this thing of like, how do I fit in?
Yes.
And I always say it's one of my strengths as well, but I was great at adapting. But it got to a point where it was also a flaw, and I really lost who I was. And I think a lot of it is linked to being able to take on 2 cultures and 2 religions. And and I was in a school that my secondary school was not the greatest, let's just put it like that. And it was so very much like you're fighting for survival, that kind of ethos. And so a lot of it played into like my identity, who I was, and really followed me through into my corporate career. And then I'd say in my 20s, I was in a extremely long relationship that, if I have to put an umbrella, I would say was unhealthy. And I would say, and a lot of it was down to communication, and that I wouldn't say how I would feel, I wouldn't express myself. And on the surface I can say that, and I think it probably sounds like, yeah, cool, lots of people can find themselves in that situation, but it went on for so long, and I just couldn't find my way out of it. And I remember at the time I was like so petrified of losing this person, rather than actually valuing like my worth and what was important to me. And there's a lot that I settled for in that relationship that wasn't okay. We'll just put it like that for now. So a combination of that, and then also like being in my corporate career, and again, I was really good at adapting, I was good at climbing the corporate ladder really quickly, and I thrived off it. But I think I really struggled to separate actually between me doing well and like actually it forming part of my identity. And I think it got to the crossroads where I was like, this is not working. And I think there was probably one point where I just remember like being on autopilot and just going through the motions of life. So probably my 3 key areas, like my family, my upbringing, my romantic relationships, were not the best, and then work as well. So it all came to a head, and I realized, actually, it took me a while to like piece this together, but I really realized that if I had a better relationship with myself, I would have shown up differently at work, and I would have shown up differently in my romantic relationship, and I wouldn't have settled for less than, and I wouldn't have been okay with silent treatment, and would have walked away a lot earlier. And that is my path, and I wasn't supposed to. But I'd probably say that the 3 key moments that came together as to why I do what I do now.
Oh, amazing. Can I just ask you about cultural background a little bit? Because I'm always very curious about this. And so would you mind telling me about what are those different backgrounds that you've grown up with?
Yeah, of course. So my dad is Egyptian, and he grew up in Egypt. So he's also Muslim. And my mum is born and brought up in London, but she's actually mixed. And I think the interesting thing is, growing up for me, I always looked at my dad as like the foreign one, and my mum as English. But actually my mum's background is she's mixed, and my grandma's Anglo-Indian, so she's Black Portuguese mixed with Indian, so very mixed in my house. And my mum grew up as my grandma is strict Catholic, really different worlds. And I think different as well because my mum was born and brought up in London, whereas my dad wasn't. And so you had so many things that play in terms of like from a generational point of view, in terms of also like my mum and dad are actually both the oldest of their siblings as well. So like that has a huge has a huge part to play, and the responsibility that they feel. And I'm one of 3. I'm the middle child, but I also say that like I act like the oldest, which my sister and my brother will probably hate me for saying. So there was like huge dynamics in that. And and it was hard at that time navigating, I think, those 2 religions as well. And I think especially growing up in quite a rough East London school, I remember as well, like probably for most of my teenage years, I really hid who I was. And definitely as well in terms of like my dad's religion. And I think I saw somebody else speak about this lately as well, and that like I didn't want anyone to know that like my dad was Muslim, because you just get taken, I was going to swear but I won't, you just get taken the mick out of, and you get teased for it. And as a teenager, it was that story of like, how do I survive? And I'm going to do what I need to.
So how did that then affect your communication? I guess you start hiding more, and you're not really expressing. And like you've used the word adapted so many times already. So I guess that was like you were suffocating your own views, or what happened? What do you notice now afterwards? And what did you pick up about communicating at that point that then wasn't serving you later?
I think you've worded it so beautifully, because even when you said suffocated, if you'd said that to me at the time, I would have batted that back and been like, what are you talking about? And I also think there was an element for me of that blissfully unaware. So where I would just do, but definitely the adaptation, if I had to put it another way, I'd say like I masked a lot. So I probably at the time wouldn't have said I felt suffocated. I would have been blissfully unaware and said, what are you talking about? Because I masked a lot. And although I would acknowledge and think about it internally, and I'd have like my internal dialogue, a huge way it showed up for me would be like the overthinking and overplaying situations and decisions. And I think to the outer world, like nobody else would have been like any the wiser. And I think as well, there was a real disconnect in terms of when you say as well, like, how did it affect my communication? Like for me, I masked a lot. So it meant that I didn't speak up, and I didn't say what I really felt or what was important to me. And I think that there's so much irony in it, because one, to the outside world, lots of people would have described me at that point in my life as confident. Right, so it was such a disconnect. But also, if you looked back at this 6-year-old version of me, I used to get labelled, if you look at my school reports, as bossy, which I absolutely despise teachers putting that on a school report. But I knew my own mind from a really young age. And actually, I think that got lost in my teenage years. My communication, it wasn't that it wasn't there. And I'd still be really bold, but I would dampen it down a lot. And if it was going to cause any sort of conflict, I would be super aware of it. I'd be able to preempt it before it really happened. And if I thought that it wasn't going to serve me very well, then I'd suppress it and I'd mask a lot. So then I would essentially just mold. I would mold according to whatever situation I was in. I would mold according to who I was in a room with. And whilst it's a great skill, when you're overdoing it, you really lose like your authentic piece. So it's different to explain it in terms of like how I felt at the time versus like how it would have been noticeable to other people, because I think a lot of people at that time would have been like, you're confident, you speak up if you have a problem, you're very feisty. But I think as well, that's one way, but how I felt internally was I was overthinking everything. I doubted myself a lot. When I was doing well and I was achieving, which was like my story and my narrative, then everything was great. But if I had a hiccup, I wouldn't know how to deal with that. So a lot was like my internal dialogue. And to everybody else, that they really would have thought I was confident, but it's definitely not how I felt.
Oh gosh, how interesting. So then when you went into your corporate career, what did it look like on the outside, and what did that feel like on the inside then? Because I'm sure there's lots of women out there, so who might benefit from hearing that, really. How different that can look like on the outside and what it is then on the inside.
So my corporate career, I'm always like so grateful for it, and I feel that without it I wouldn't be able to do the work or work with the people that I work with because of that experience. And I always describe it as in a fast-paced kind of pressure cooker environment, but it's also an environment that I used to thrive off of. So when I speak about it, I speak about it from a really positive lens because of like how I was able to operate in that environment. So I'd say going into like my first corporate career, I was like more or less straight out of uni. So I was just grateful. I was like super grateful. I was so eager to learn. It was very much like that good girl syndrome, and always wanted to do well. You could throw anything at me. And I remember as well, I don't know why I was having this conversation the other day actually, and I was having this conversation and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this. And we were talking around in your corporate career, talking about money and sometimes like your promotion, asking for your pay rise, and where it can be a really taboo subject. And I was still really early on in my corporate career. And I remember I was already going above and beyond. So I would put in extra. And my job at the time was like super basic. It wasn't what I ended up doing at all. And something in me was bold enough, and I think I've always had that kind of like internal conflict where the doubt can be there, but on the bottom line is that I'll still speak up. And the bold part of me decided to check in with the team, and there was somebody that I worked with and see what they were getting paid. Because for some reason, I think I just had a feeling that I was being underpaid.
Yeah.
And the person I was working with was a temp. They had a lot more experience, but they weren't doing the job to the same standard that I was. And there was something in me that was like, this is unfair. Like, this is not okay. Anyway, and it turns out they were getting paid. I had an honest conversation with them. So they just told me outright, and they were getting paid 10 grand more than me, which whether you look at it now or look at it then is still a lot of money. And I think as well, there was like, then in terms of like how I communicated it, looking back, I would say that I was probably like super volatile in those days and very reactive. And I was fuming that was even a possibility and that nobody thought there was anything wrong about it. Whereas now, if I was communicating it, and I guess I talk about it a lot with my clients in terms of how you negotiate your pay rise and actually how do you have those difficult conversations with your boss, and what's the dynamic and the culture of your corporate environment. So I remember being bold enough, even in my like early days of my corporate career, to go and have the conversation, and I addressed it with my boss. And anyway, we went through like that avenue, and I remember like having to really fight and advocate for myself. And because of the way that the teams were structured, my boss actually didn't know that's what the pay gap was.
Right.
And I remember really having to just take it to that extent and fight for it and fight for myself. And I guess that was also a narrative that I had to undo. You're not always going to be the underdog. You're not always going to have to fight for this. And that's just one really distinct thing that I remember, because I think as well, corporate life and pay and promotion, it comes up a lot, and being able to like advocate for yourself is important. And then I'd say, if I had to sum up my 12 years, so I'll do it in a nutshell, is I had that good girl mentality. So I was constantly striving and like chasing for like my next promotion. What was I going to do well? How was I growing? What feedback was I getting? And I really fell into like my learning and development role, which I always say set me up for what I do now. And I don't think I ever questioned if I was going to do anything else. I think when I fell into learning and development, I really realized like I'm good with people and this is where I thrive. And I just was continuing until I got my head of or department role. I think that's what I was really aiming for. And then came to a crossroads where at the time I couldn't see this because I was just doing the do. And I don't think I stopped for a breath to come back and step away and actually say, is this aligned with me? I don't think I knew at that point, do I know who I am at my core level? Do I know who I am without my work? I don't think I knew that. And at the time, my like long-term relationship was also ending. So like lots of change coming around. And if anyone's into astrology, it aligned with my Saturn's return. So it explains everything. And then I was up for this promotion, and essentially I was already doing the job, and I got told, you have potential, but I don't have time to invest into you. And I think for me, it was just like the nail in the coffin. And I was like, okay, Amira, you either stay and don't feel worthy and then let this build into resentment, or you have a choice to get out and value yourself and actually go and find what it is that you want to do, and the thing that now I hope that what I do now for a living and with my clients is what I'm here to do. So yeah, my corporate life was amazing and incredible, and I worked with phenomenal people, and I'm so incredibly grateful for it. I worked really hard. I lost myself in that time, and I didn't know myself well enough at a core level to be able to like have boundaries, or to be able to communicate what I needed, or to be able to say, hey, on a professional level, that isn't okay, and this is actually what I do need, and moving forward, I would like us to discuss that. I didn't have that skill set, and a lot of the time I'd shut down and internalize it, and that wasn't healthy. So I think that's probably a good overview of 12 years.
So interesting what I was thinking about. So there was a little bit of an overlap with your relationship coming to an end, and then the corporate career not going there where you wanted. Was there a certain moment where you noticed that things started, I don't know if there was a light bulb moment or something that kind of started changing for you, both sides, or what did you notice that now this is not quite, when did you ask yourself, is this working for me, or is it not working, both personally and in your career as well?
So I always say, for me, there was like a culmination of things that have got me to the point that I am now. And I think one thing led to another. And I know, for example, like I was in that relationship way longer than I rarely use the word should as a coach, but let's say that I could have exited the relationship a lot earlier, and I didn't. So I think for me, a lot of things were building for a long time. And as I said as well, like I used to overthink a lot. So I'd internalize a lot and reflect a lot. And if I had to nail it down to like one moment, and this was because it was like so pivotal, that's the word I'm looking for, I'd say it was this, because I think this is when I realized, wow, you're operating in autopilot all of the time.
Right. Yeah.
And I had this trip to Brazil, which was for a work trip, and it was the first time they were doing it, and it was essentially an exchange project, and you go and work with a company that you choose that aligns with like your skill set and your expertise. And the idea is that you take away what you can and bring back to your company and your business, and you add value and work on a project for them as well. And it was hands down one of my best experiences to this day, and one amazing. That I'm incredibly grateful for. And I think what I realized is that within 24 hours of walking into the work environment there, I felt like I'd always been there. And bear in mind, this was me navigating like language barriers, and they were like a tech education startup. My background isn't tech, and there was so many challenges there. And I walked in, and within 24 hours, I was like, oh, I can be me. And then that kind of, for the next probably, I'd say 12 months, questioned, what am I doing?
Yeah.
What am I hiding? And I think it goes back to your question when you said, as a 16-year-old, like, how did it affect my communication? It was a lot of masking, and it was a lot of hiding, and it was a lot of like shame of who I was. And then I think that didn't spark like, oh, I'm leaving my corporate career and I'm going to start a business. There's another 3 or 4 years, I think, in between that before I even started the business. But I would say probably it was like a culmination of the last 5 years before that, of like blissfully being unaware or just letting things slide. Then I had this shift in environment and shift in people that then made me start questioning. And then I'd say probably that was like my biggest year of transformation that then followed.
Oh my goodness. It sounds amazing, but often it takes that getting away from the usual environments and everything, some different kind of energy, and things start to feel different, and then you start to notice, and I suppose you see different environments, like, okay, I feel different in this environment compared to that environment. So it sounds really amazing how then it starts building. And of course, many times it takes some time for us to kind of start figuring out. And it's not so easy to just jump from one place to the next and so on. But you need to build it up. So that sounds really amazing now, how that's changed for you, and what amazing then opportunities is created and everything's just. So tell me a little bit about what's your life like today?
Life is very different.
Yeah.
Relationship wise, we just got married, so I feel like that's a big benchmark.
Congratulations. Amazing.
Thank you. So that's definitely a big milestone in terms of relationships. And I think there was a lot of work to heal my subconscious patterns and what didn't work for me in a relationship, and really question and look at, okay, why am I willing to settle, and why, and what were some of the beliefs that underpin that, because I think that I didn't understand that at the time. So did a lot of work in that area of life. I obviously now run my own business, which is amazing. I think we're coming up to 3 years, which feels a little bit surreal when I say that. So I think running my business in the way that I do and working with, whether it's companies or one-to-ones, it's really giving them the tools and the skill set. Because I always say the way that you communicate is like, it's just a skill. And I rarely use the word just because it undermines, but it's just a skill. And you just need to learn what those skills are and put them in your toolbox. And then you'll have this huge toolbox to play with. And you'll be able to decide in that situation, like, what is it that I need? And you will learn that, because there's so much nuance around it. It's not about one way of doing it, but if you can channel how you really communicate in your authentic way and know when you want to adapt as well. And I think I have to be so careful when I talk about authenticity versus adaptability, because I was running a group session last week, and they said to me, Amira, like, what about if I'm adapting and it doesn't feel authentic to me? And it's never about like, you needing one more than the other, but it's actually, what do you need in that situation? And for me, a lot of my life was spent adapting, and I lost myself as a result. But equally, if we're only going to sit in our authentic space, then at some point you need to adapt, and that will feel really weird for you in the beginning if you're not used to it. So just because something isn't authentic, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing it. So I think that's sometimes a misconception that I hear that's important to look at. So yeah, life looks really differently. I would like to say I have a lovely, loving, healthy relationship where we're really aligned, and there's a lot of space for us to be who we are. And there's a lot in terms of like culture that gets brought in, and there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of why I'm proud of that now and how I can hold space for that, and that is part of who I am. And work is going, and I run my business and I work with people that I love and adore working with, and I feel super privileged to do.
Amazing. So what are the current common problems that your clients bring to you, and what's on their minds, and what are the struggles that they're having in their communication?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that for every client, it's really different. And sometimes we end up working in themes. So I have a lot of my clients at the moment who are working through their romantic relationships. And it might be that they're dating, it might be that they're going through a breakup, or it might be that they're in a relationship. So there's no just set one example. But often people will come to me when they're either overthinking and they just can't stop, and it's impacting life in a way. So it could be impacting their family life, it could be impacting like jobs or career decisions. Usually people will come to me when they're like, there's a lot of self-doubt, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. They might have just started a new job, and great, they're happy they got it, but actually they feel like the imposter syndrome is creeping in. I think I get a lot of my clients, actually, they've already got to the point where they manifested their dream job. They're like, this is exactly what I wanted, but now I'm in it and I'm talking myself out of it. I don't feel like I'm thriving or showing up in the way that I want. This is not where I want to be. And a lot comes down to as well, like a lot of my other clients will be like, I'm not communicating in the way that I want to, or I'm being misunderstood. And it could be, for example, with their team at work, it could be with their partner at home, it could be with their kids. So there's a lot around in terms of expressing and understanding, like, how do you want to communicate in a healthy way for you? What's your natural style? Where do you need to adapt? And we naturally do a lot of work around like your needs, and also as well on top of that, like conflict's a huge thing. And I think probably when I talk about conflict, most people switch off because you'll either say like you don't have it, or conflict feels like it's got to be really bad. But actually, so many of us let so many things go and slide. And actually, that's where it starts to build. Absolutely. And yeah, I'd say people come to me probably at a stage where it's too late. Usually is what I say when it comes to conflict. I'm like, actually, if we did the work way before and had those conversations, we probably wouldn't be in this situation, in this relationship.
Absolutely. Because then things escalate, and then it's really tricky to bring it back. Whereas if you start addressing things when it's just a little bit and not letting things slide. And I suppose it goes often with this good girl syndrome, is you're not listening to yourself and you're just like, oh, okay, it's fine, when it's not fine anymore. And then you explode, or however it comes out.
Exactly, spot on. And it's actually about, okay, how do I manage my emotions? And how is this contributing to my behaviors that don't help? For example, why am I getting defensive? Why am I shutting down and not saying anything? Why am I super agreeable? And even in last week's group session, I talk a lot, like in terms of from my perspective, and a lot of my old behavior was to get defensive. And for me, that's because I would feel criticized. And somebody raised a beautiful question and said, okay, Amira, like, what about for me when I just avoid? I don't want the conflict. So I'll agree and I'll just say yes, but I don't really mean that at all. So actually it's underpinning, like, where does that reaction come from? What's the emotion that either you're trying to avoid? Why did I feel that I needed to be defensive? Why did I feel like I needed to justify or over explain? Yeah, there's lots there in terms of how it can show up differently for everybody. And conflict is probably one of my favorite things to talk about, because I feel that we undermine it, we dismiss it. And I think it's like the stat is 80% of the population like don't want to have conflict. And it goes back to those hard conversations. It goes back to how you communicate what your needs are. And I've had conversations recently with friends, even like coming up to the holiday season, and talking about what they want to do, and being married and navigating two families, and each family wants different things. And actually, how do you draw it back to also share and express what you need? But it doesn't have to be in a selfish way. It doesn't have to be with that love and empathy. But where are we finding like those healthy boundaries so that you're living life in a way that feels good? Because I think we don't, and then the resentment builds, or the feelings of animosity or anger. And then, exactly as you said, that's where conflict builds.
Yes, absolutely. So what would be your kind of top tips for communicating in a way that you feel good afterwards and get your needs out there and you're expressing yourself?
I love that. So probably first thing I would say straight off the back is, let's bust the myth that you have to communicate in the moment. And I think sometimes when you haven't developed your toolbox enough, or you don't have the skill set to do it, you actually need time. And even if you do have the toolbox, if you're a reflective learner and you like to actually play things back, you're not going to want to answer in the moment, because you need a little bit of time to collate your thoughts. The first thing is that you can take time to go away, reflect on something, think about actually what you want to say. I call this scripting. And I always get my clients to like use a framework to write down actually, what do you want to say? How do you want to say that? What's maybe the key 1 or 2 points? You don't need to hit somebody with 10 things. They're never going to remember it. It's not going to create a healthy conversation. So take time out if you need it. You don't have to answer in the moment. But the other thing on that I would say is, don't go and take a week and try and come back to the conversation. Okay, if you need to sleep on it, if you can come back to it later that day, beautiful. But just don't feel like you have to answer in the moment, and equally be mindful of like how you come back to it. That's the first thing I would say in terms of timing of conversation. The second thing I would say, there's so many things I want to say. The second thing I would say is, first of all, learn how to develop your awareness. And this is going to be part of where you have to get really honest about, why do you communicate in the way that you do? What are the parts that you do really well? I want you to take acknowledgement of those. But what are the areas that you don't do well? Where you come in unstuck? Because they're the pieces that we suppress or we don't want to own. And until we take ownership of those parts that we don't like and about ourselves in terms of how we're communicating, then you can't do anything about it. So I would say, learn how to check in with yourself. Start journaling. It's probably something that I always say encourage, but I enforce this on my clients, because your brains are working so quickly. You've got thousands and thousands of thoughts going through your head a day. So if you want to develop that self-awareness, reflect on your day. What did you do that you're proud of? Where did you communicate in a way that you're not proud of? So that's probably tip number 2. Tip number 3, I'm going to say, take a look at your relationships at the moment in your life. All types of relationships: professional, personal, work related, home, family, partner, love life. And be honest and reflect on, what's the one relationship where things could be better, and how could you adapt or do something differently in terms of how you communicate in that relationship? Because I think that will give you a really good kind of signpost in terms of what work you might want to do differently, the tools you might need to learn. And if you can address that, you'll boil it down to, maybe there's conflict there, maybe you haven't communicated your boundaries, maybe you feel like the other person isn't responding in a healthy way. And I always say, when it comes down to communicating, you're not responsible for anybody else. You only have power and control over you. So the more you can focus on that, the more you will find peace within your relationships. And overall, you are then going to develop out that toolbox.
Yes. So amazing tips. Absolutely. I think that is many times what you started with, is that people worry that I have to come up with an instant answer to this problem. And if I am someone who takes a bit of time, I need time to reflect, then that puts so much pressure. And then you might actually decide that it's easier just to walk away or what have you. And instead of communicating, let me come back to it, or however you do it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the self-awareness. I think this is the thing that you can't really talk about too much, because so many of us, and there's always more to learn, because we obviously develop as humans, but many of us didn't grow up to really know. And it, like you earlier used this word autopiloting, whether you are in your career or relationships and all of that. And if we are just trying to autopilot, then we are not connecting with ourselves. And the better we know ourselves, the better we can do everything in life, really.
Definitely. And I sometimes feel like it's the most boring answer, because I've been on podcasts and people are like, yep, Amira, like you always talk about self-awareness. And I'm like, but it's really difficult for you to change the way you communicate in your relationships if you don't first start with you. And doesn't mean you have to be perfect. And exactly as you say, like, we're all on this journey, and it's always about deepening it. And it's not about you don't have self-awareness, but it is about, okay, where have I got my blind spots? And I talk about that a lot. Okay, you can only see what you can see. So who's helping you grow? How are you willing to own those parts? But the more you do, the better you'll get at it, and the more you'll develop these tools and these skill sets so that you can actually express your ideas, open up, address your emotions. But it's going to be really difficult to do it with somebody else if you can't do it with yourself first.
Yes. And I suppose the thing about self-awareness is that because it's hard work and it's not always comfortable, that people would rather just, can you give me a tool that will just help me to get through this? But the tools don't work if you don't know yourself first. So
I say the exact same thing.
You need to start from yourself first, and then you can use different tools and try out. But it's hard work. And I'm so glad that self-awareness is being talked about a lot, but there's still a lot of room for just focusing on. And and then what you were saying about really focusing maybe one relationship at a time, use that as a learning ground, so that then you can start thinking about, if I learn to master maybe communication better in this area, and how does that then relate to other areas, for example, in your relationship, but if it feels a safer place to try out different things and come more with your ideas. And if you master that and you feel comfortable with your partner, then that can lead to, talking up or speaking up more at work and so on. So all of those really brilliant tips, and for anyone really to practice and keep learning, because there isn't ever communication that you can completely master everything in every situation.
Definitely. And I think you just raised like a beautiful point in terms of just focus on one, because I often find with my clients, it's then what I call the ripple effect. So look at one area, because you will naturally, it will open up another door, but it's overwhelming if you're trying to do everything at once. And I just really love when you said, if your relationship is your safe space, I always say practice with the person or the people that you feel safest with when you're trying to do things differently. If you've got that person that feels really difficult in your life, we all have them, and somebody I think messaged me really recently on Instagram and said, Amira, like, I've got this person that I want to communicate with, but I know they're going to react badly, but I need to still have the conversation. What can I do to make sure that it's a healthy, effective conversation? So exactly as you said, try it out and practice in the areas and with the people that do feel good, and then you'll evolve and you'll build from there.
It's been such a lovely to have this conversation with you. If people want to know more about your work, what's the best way to learn about you and everything?
Most definitely. I always say, come and find me on Instagram. It's @the_communication expert. I always say it's my office. It's where I hang out, but you can also find me on LinkedIn as well, which is Amira Mansour. So just same as my name. And if you want to learn more and you're looking for some free resources, then we've got the podcast all around communication. So definitely check it out. It's called Open Up with Amira. And also you can work with me on a one-to-one basis. Always book in a discovery call, first of all, which was 30 minutes, a little bit of a sense check. Are we the right fit for each other? And then we go from there.
Amazing offers there. So go and check those out and improve your communication, because that way your life will feel definitely better when you're communicating well and not hiding yourself or anything like that. So thank you so much, Amira, for coming to have this conversation with me. Is there any final words or anything that you want to leave this conversation with to anyone as a bit of motivation or anything like that for people out there?
Most definitely. I would say focus on the small steps, what I call the marginal gains, the 1% is where your biggest transformations come from. So you can still have your big ideas and your visions, but remember, the work comes with the small steps.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you so much, Amira. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh. If you learned something new, please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, and that way other women who are also looking for that loving long-term relationship can hear about this and be part of building a community of women who know how to date in a way that is not stressful but instead is empowering. Share the words with someone. If you have a friend who also needs to hear this, please go and share with them and be part of their potential love story. Be part of they taking ownership of their love life, them feeling empowered and creating their love life. If you wanted to know more about the support that I offer for my dating coaching clients, you can find the details in the show notes. You can go and book a free 30-minute dating clinic consultation and get clarity on your dating situation and what is stopping you from finding love. And together we can figure out what is stopping you from finding love and help you to move forward and finally towards meeting the right person for you. And please remember, always give yourself the love you're seeking first, and that way you will attract the love you want in your life. Bye for now.